Hey everybody, turns out it's been ages since I've made a video and I'm mucking up a lot more than I normally do when reading the script. It's an intro review here, and today, or at least it was today when I wrote this, it's yesterday now, DLU made another announcement. I haven't been covering all of the DLU announcements on here recently because, well, most of them primarily correspond to gameplay related things rather than the community stuff that this channel was originally set up to talk about. However, we are an LU community, so the gameplay stuff isn't unrelated, and with DLU's most recent announcement, I think we have reached possibly the largest milestone we've ever reached as a community. Okay, I guess that's true with every announcement, because you don't really go backwards in terms of milestones, but basically my point is this is big. And no, it's not an update on when closed beta will be happening, so if that's what you're hoping for, sorry, we've still got no more information about closed beta than it will be happening by the end of the year. And that's not something that's just from the original announcement that was posted. It's been reaffirmed that it still looks set to be by the end of the year, that everything's still on course with that. And I'll discuss that a little bit more later in the video. But, in fact, the feature contained within the announcement itself is actually pretty minor. It's the Cannon Cove shooting gallery, and an update that allows current testers to maintain their new characters into closed beta. And, okay, from a development perspective, the Cannon Cove shooting gallery isn't necessarily minor. It's got a lot of quite interesting things going on development-wise, but, in terms of what most players are looking for in the game, it's relatively small. So, why did this announcement get a video of its own when, stuff like Crux Prime, Forbidden Valley, and Ninjago, none of those got one? Why is Ninja doing a whole video on Cannon Cove Shooting Gallery? Well, the answer is that this is basically the last world that needs to be added to DLU. I say world, the reason why I say it like that is because, well, mini-games in LU, you go to their specific maps, they do count as their own worlds. And this isn't to say the game is complete, it definitely isn't, and one thing on the horizon which would be really worth celebrating when it comes is brick building. We've seen it in some form on DLU, but in no stable form yet. But this announcement about Shooting Gallery, this marks the last new world which had yet to be added. Yes, there's no Lego Club at the moment. DLU are currently debating what they want to do with that. Their stance at the moment is that, well, Lego Club's a very old and outdated advert for a magazine, so let's see if we can come up with something new for it. So, we'll see what happens there. That's going to come under, I'd say, more or less stuff like future content, but it's worth noting that DLU have mentioned that when they do go open source, the stuff for Lego Club will be there, so people can run Lego Club. And so, before I begin, it's worth noting that, no, worlds are not a perfect or even a particularly great judge of server progress. Right from the early days of pretty much all LEGO Universe Server Emulator projects, you'd have been able to visit pretty much all the worlds, okay, with a few exceptions. And so, if we were just counting worlds, well, then the server is no more complete now than it was then. But DLU's no uni. The basis of most worlds in DLU has been working for years. The issue is that all it takes is one single mission that hasn't been implemented to block a player from completing a world. However, aside from Vanguard and Survival and the Spider Queen fight, DLU have tried to make it a rule that they'd not release a world until it was largely completed, or at least the majority of the required quest chain was possible there. They perhaps weren't the most strict about this of all the servers, especially early on at Vanguard, they released before a lot of that was doable, but everything since then, they've kept pretty closely to do it. Notable exceptions being the Nile Forest and Forbidden Valley, those were both released as previews, and they did not have everything complete in it. So when I say they're not the most strict in servers, I think something like LCDRU is possibly more strict, but the rough point still stands. We've reached a stage where DLU have implemented enough content that they feel comfortable releasing every single world in the game. They're not all 100% completed. In particular, brick building is the one thing where I really think when that comes, I will be able to sit here and record a video saying that, aside from bugs, LU is completed. Right now, we haven't seen brick building in a stable enough state that I think I can say that. So, we're not free of bugs, and we don't have brick building, but this is huge. This marks the last world that's not been added because it wasn't ready. And that's really cool. The milestones I see coming are the last features being added, i.e. brick building, and then the small bugs, the small things being added, and having a perfectly polished game. And so, to put this in perspective, I'm going to retell a story I've told a lot on streams recently. About a year ago, I'd just recorded the interview with Darwin, and we were talking afterwards. Both of us were interested in doing something like that interview again in the future, and he suggested that, between closed alpha and closed beta, when the servers were down, we could record another interview, maybe getting another developer or two in to join us. And the big thing, which honestly got me incredibly excited, was that, as part of this, he suggested we could go run around in a sneak preview of Gnarled Forest, because, at the time, that was the target for closed beta. What had been put out there was that crash testing would end when Avant Gardens was completed, and closed beta would start with Gnarled Forest. Gnarled Forest. I realise I spend a lot of time talking about specific worlds as though you perhaps all exactly know what they are, and I guess that doesn't necessarily work, especially if for those of you who were never paid members in the original. So, Gnarled Forest was the fourth world in LU's main quest chain, and the second with enemies. DLU were at the time that this announcement was made on their third world, Nimbus Station, and had said that their plan was to release closed beta once Avant Gardens was fully completed and the legal stuff was sorted out. At the time, I remember feeling as though a fully completed Avant Gardens was a huge ask. In fact, I put out a video discussing stuff like this, and they would require a ton of progress and stuff we hadn't really seen any project fully complete or undertake yet. Avant Gardens Survival, Complete Spider Queen, and the Monument Race, alongside a plethora of smaller features. I estimated this alone could take into the middle of this year, and to be fair, technically Avant Gardens still isn't completed. There are features which are lacking in it, but you'd hardly notice the ones which aren't there. My point is, this time last year, Gnarled Forest was going to be the exciting new content in closed beta. And then something crazy happened. I feel as though, and this is partially from my own kind of reading of the changelog and partially from talking to devs, I feel as though it was DLU's team acquiring a new balance, which really sparked this, with suddenly as many people interested in implementing specific gameplay features as the more underlying back-end systems, and suddenly progress shot forward with these two sides of the coin really playing off against one another, rather than what had been the case in the past, that DLU was incredibly strong on the back end, but people like Winston working on Uchu had actually implemented typically more features into the game, and suddenly you had both sides of the coin working together, feeding one another. So a new feature being implemented gameplay-wise might point out that something needs to be done back-end, and you'd get people playing off back and forth, and every time a new gameplay feature is implemented, you get the community being really excited, and it just spirals, you get a huge leap of positivity, and I think that's what suddenly happened. And so, by the time I released my predictions video, already the Spider Queen had been released. I remember making that video at the time and being like, oh yeah. So as of writing this script, the Spider Queen wasn't implemented, and I've now got to change my prediction by that. I don't know what's happening. There was a lot of umming and ahhing in the original script. I think Vice edited most of it down. That's kind of where we were. And yeah, Gnarled Forest was already being previewed. These were things which were not expected. And so, I'm going back through memory lane because it's truly incredible the progress that was made. To put this in perspective, LCDRU originally announced its alpha 3 years ago, on the 30th of September 2017. If I remember correctly, this already more or less included gameplay up to Nimbus Station. And for years, that was the gold standard for playable content, with none of the other projects really coming close to matching it. Eventually, with LCDR working hard on the more technical back-end side of things, with structuring a large scalable server, other projects began to catch up, but it honestly took years. As of May 2020, just last year, DLU were still only about halfway through Avant Gardens. They hadn't made it to Nimbus Station yet. To put this in a little bit more perspective, people have been working on LEGO Universe emulator projects for nearly 10 years now. And in terms of a playable quest chain, until a little over a year ago, people were still limited to the first few worlds. So, to suddenly have every single world in the game working, at least to some extent, in about a year and a half, they've more than doubled the number of worlds. I'd say on the order, if you count like World Builder League, etc. as all their own individual worlds, probably more than triple the number of worlds in under a fifth of the time. And so, I find this really incredible. It's something I don't think literally anyone expected, including the devs themselves, and all because years of experience different developers had in working in slightly different areas of the game just happened to fit together perfectly. So yeah, I know many of you will be annoyed that closed beta is taking this long from DLU's original announcement, that it would happen sometime this year, but know this. For once, it's not the pace of development holding DLU back, as it has been for years. Yes, this legal stuff is annoying to wait for, but in the meantime, DLU has managed to implement every world! I cannot stress how strange this is. I feel I've got to make really clear why I think this is so amazing. Because for years, this was just not something this was never anticipated you could get so much done. There were 7 years of more or less avant-gardens. And suddenly we get all the way throughout all of the other worlds. And I think that is incredible. I remember on one of my very first videos for this channel, actually, certainly when I started posting to it regularly, I mentioned that I thought then was the best time there'd ever been to be a part of the LU community, and that was certainly true at the time, but it's only gotten better since then. This is really a brilliant time. This is the time when suddenly stuff's possible, and stuff happening isn't years in advance. It's always been a case. One rule of thumb I always had was that however long you expect development to take, always add 2 years, or it might have been double the time, always add 2 years onto it, because it always takes much longer than we expect. But here I think we're actually reaching the stage where that's not the case. And I remember making my predictions video, I was getting quite excited, and I don't think that's really worn off. If anything, I mean, my predictions have been far, far, far exceeded. So, I feel I should also quickly address what's going on with legal stuff at the moment. Just for anyone who's only seen this video, DLU and DLU projects in general have broken just about every single rule in LU's terms and conditions and end-user license agreement. This has been fine, because people have been in some degree of contact with LEGO throughout, and LEGO have been we don't really care. However, as DLU prepared to let in significantly more players during closed beta, they also realised that the servers might begin to be costly, and they wanted a way to accept donations from people to keep the servers going. Unfortunately, that's dangerous territory legally, and whilst LEGO haven't minded LU projects so far, taking money from the public is a whole different matter altogether. It's not just reverse engineering some code LEGO don't care about, it would be, or at least from LEGO's perspective, if they're not careful, it is someone who is not LEGO making money from LEGO's content, and that's something they want to be incredibly, incredibly careful about. That in almost any company will be. And so because of this, LEGO wants to set a precedent and be very careful to clearly set the precedent that projects like this, working off of LEGO's IP, should be not-for-profit only, which is actually one of the few parts of LU's terms which no one's broken yet. And as such, DLU is having to go through the process of legally registering as a not-for-profit organisation. This is a tedious bureaucratic process, and all of this whilst remaining in talks between LEGO Games and LEGO's legal department, which is the reason this is all taking so long. Basically, bureaucracy sucks. Anyway, I am, as I'm sure you can tell, incredibly excited about all of this, and about us getting ever closer to finally having LU back. We're only a few months away now from closed beta opening, and I'll hopefully look forward to seeing many of you in the game then. Thank you all so much for listening, and for bearing with LU projects for all these years. I've been DLU, and as always, developer channels are in the description, so please leave a message, be it here or be it somewhere else, letting the developers know just how much their work has meant to you, because it's your enthusiasm, the enthusiasm of the community as a whole, which really keeps these projects going. Thank you so much for listening to this video, and I'll see you around. Bye.